Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Lorca, and my family and I are uninvited guests on the stolen and unceded lands of the Coast Salish First Nations, in particular the Staulo, Katsi, Kwantlen, Kwikwetlem, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen territories of the Surrey Delta area in BC, and of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Peoples in the Vancouver area, where my family and I first landed and where I grew up. I am a person who lives with pain and chronic pain and complex chronic disease, and I'm also proud to be one of the steering members of this amazing Putting the Pieces Together conference. And so it is my deepest pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Yellowbird. Dr. Yellowbird is a professor and former dean of the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. He is a member of the Mandan, Hidatsan, and Arikara Nation, or the MHA Nation in North Dakota. He is a certified, internationally trained mindfulness meditation teacher, professional, and scholar, and has been practicing mindfulness meditation since 1975. Among his many roles, and he has many, including the co-president of the Mindfulness Council of Canada Board of Directors and member of the Council of Elders for Indigenous Mindfulness Practices, Dr. Yellowbird is a mindfulness consultant and trainer to many organizations, programs, and communities, and serves as a decolonial contemplative mentor and scholar. His mindfulness and contemplative work and research have been featured on numerous podcasts, websites, magazines, newspapers, scholarly publications, and symposia, one of which is where I have had the privilege to meet him in person. Welcome, Michael. We are so excited to hear you speak today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the warm welcome. I just want to acknowledge the land, the territory I'm on. I'm situated here, I should say, in the Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba on the lands of the Cree, Ojai-Cree, the Anishinaabe, Dakota people, and the homelands, of course, of the Métis people. So I'm really glad to be here today and thankful for this opportunity to kind of share some information and some knowledge and some of the work that I do. So I want to just go ahead and jump right into it and share my screen and start talking about my topic about decolonizing pain. Decolonization is something that I've been working on for a long time as a scholar and as a practitioner about how does one sort of overcome the effects of colonization that serves to manipulate, control, and to dominate our lives, whatever that may be, right? And how sometimes that colonization can have all these other sort of web-like and tentacle effects where it affects our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health, and well-being. So I just wanted to share some of the work that I do that I think would be helpful to decolonizing pain and helping us take another look at what pain is from an indigenized context that I work on. This first slide are two of my daughters who are both meditators. And this was probably taken about 5 years ago. They're still meditators. And one of the reasons they meditate is because meditation is one of those practices that helps us center, that helps us to, kind of resituate ourselves in life and sort of hit the reset button. So I've got 4 grown sons and 4 young daughters, and they're all meditators. So I'm going to just move on from that, just with that in context and that in mind, talk about declare I have no conflict of interest here, and just affirming my actions, decisions, and judgment concerning my presentation today is objective without bias. So the work that I do is from the medicine wheel, and many of you may have seen this, but what I try to do is take a look at the medicine wheel in another way by integrating traditional indigenous wisdom along with Western science, kind of a hybrid approach to kind of thinking how do we get the most mileage out of the medicine wheel. Well, one of the things that we know, those of us who do the work in the medicine wheel know that it is. I'm sorry, can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Let's see. For some reason, I lost my screen. Let's see here. Oh, there it is. Okay. And I try to collapse those things together to kind of develop a sense of synergy with each one of these areas, whether it's the mind, whether it's the body, whether it's the spirit, and our emotions, right? All coupled with different kinds of things like neurobiology in the mind and neurosciences, and also with the body about movement, about our human microbiome, and the contemplative part is about the spirit of the practice. the meaningfulness of the practice and how it touches us and touches all parts of our body. And then again, the final piece I really look at a lot is sort of the molecular, cellular, and genetic attributes that are and blueprints that we have, and how we inherit some of these different kinds of factors that protect us from certain kinds of diseases, and sometimes make us more vulnerable to diseases. And things like our telomeres at the end of our chromosomes. I can't see it now, but I got a T-shirt from a conference that I was teaching at, and someone there made me this T-shirt that says "Indigenized telomeres." So that's kind of really what my work is about: is how do I take these kinds of things that exist in Western science and then create, other pathways with it. So in the medicine wheel, the culture, the experiences, perceptions that we have really shape our brain and body's plasticity. Our attitude towards pain is really shaped by our cultural experiences, not just to here and now, but probably several generations back. A lot of this affects, how our body works, our human microbiome, and how our muscles and our cells and all of our different processes go on in the body. And it shapes different kinds of things in our body. Could be, our major organs, could be our cells, like brain cells, it could be everything down to modulators that are neuromodulators or transmitters. I have looked at a lot and thought, how does one heal from the pain of colonization? And for me, it's like returning to ancestral contemplative practices and mindfulness practices. So I would just want to jump a little bit into the history of indigenous mindfulness practices and symbols, because I think it's very important. This is a medicine wheel, and it's located in Majorville, Carn in southern Alberta, probably about 5,500 years old. And if you can imagine, at different times, people came to this site, indigenous people from all over Turtle Island came to this site to offer prayers, to look at the constellations and the planetary movements, to join one another, with these conversations around the meaning and purpose of life and their relationship with the world, and also recognizing their mortality, and that using the time that they had in very wise ways, to do the good that they could do. This is another medicine wheel in the Bighorn Mountains, which is about 1,000 years old. And again, thinking about 5,000 to 1,000 years, you're seeing that indigenous people throughout Turtle Island are developing these kinds of symbols, to kind of, as I say, to kind of begin to integrate this holistic sort of understanding of the world around them, happiness, sadness, grief, this really high level of joy, all the way down to, the feelings and the emotions that we have that are all over, so that, we could balance, the way that we see the world and engage in the world. People still leave prayer offerings at some of these medicine wheels, and this is the Bighorn Mountains, where they leave red cloth, that is very symbolic to a lot of indigenous people. Some of these are tobacco ties, tobaccos with prayers in them, and people leave, this is a turkey feather, but different kinds of feathers. But as you can see, the prayer flags on the medicine wheel in Bighorn Mountain are the prayers that people put out, to the world. Most of these prayers are never put out for an individual, but like a lot of indigenous people, as we all were at one time, we were very collectivist. And so we put out this sort of good energy, this good feeling, this smart sort of connection to the rest of the world, and try to connect in positive ways. And that's kind of what all these all these flags are on the medicine wheel. Their prayers, their hopes, their optimism, they're all sent for healing. And not just for me, they're sent for everyone, right? We see the same kind of thing with the Buddhist flag. So you can see this, how that kind of thinking enjoins, where, all these systems are all connected. In the Great Plains area and other plains, other areas throughout Turtle Island, people do a sun dance. These are Native American prayer flags at a sun dance, again, with the same intention that's been going on for hundreds of years. But as you saw, the medicine wheels, now that's thousands of years. I've been so fortunate to travel around the world and look at all of these different kinds of petroglyphs that exist in the world, all the way from Norway, where the Sami had, some petroglyphs in some of the towns in the northern part of Norway, and a lot of these carvings and the symbols, that sort of sort of chronicled their journey and their understanding of the world. This is a rock called Juticula Rock in Cullowhee, North Carolina, in Cherokee territory. But if you take a look at all these images there, this is what life is all about. It's all these different kinds of images that exist, or all these symbols, people, different kinds of material, different kinds of beings, different kinds of organisms, and different kinds of things that are sentient, that we, like rocks or trees or plants, or those things that sometimes we don't think are sentient, but all experiencing these motions and these feelings, that are not, that are, I think, are universal. This is what these folks thought. If you look in the very center, you'll see some kind of symbol of, looks like a creature with, receptors coming out of its skull, walking up this line and holding, the hand of what looks like a child, maybe, right? And the child having something coming out of its brain. Again, I'm just putting this in the current context, something sort of emanating out of there. Maybe that's an idea. Maybe that's the brain connecting to something beyond itself in a more existential way. And so the person is moving up, as you see the path, runs into different kinds of things where that person may get stalled or whatever, but continues to make their way upward as they encounter different kinds of things. This is kind of all this is all the carvings in this petroglyph. The elders in the Cherokee, North Carolina, told me that, of course, this was not just one group, but these were many different indigenous people that came to this rock over the time of 3,000 years to leave their calling card of who they were. If you look way to the right on this particular rock, you'll see what looks like a turtle with a medicine wheel on its back, moving along, of course, in the great primordial seas, right? And so these things have these connections. So with indigenous people, when you think about traditionally, on this many thousands of years ago, there was such a strong connection with this holistic life, in what, Einstein might have called unified field theory, how we have these interactions, strong and weak interactions between things. What's important, I think, with a lot of indigenous people is, who are our people? And I just want to talk just briefly about my lineage, my contemplative lineage, and how it kind of fits my talk today. These are people who are what we call night singers in the dream world. If you had issues, if you had, spiritual, physical, mental issues, or dreams, or something that was troubling, these particular people men in these societies would sing songs to help you release from those dreams if they were bad dreams, or it would help bring those closer to you to learn from what you're dreaming about, and from the teachings of the night. This was a great-grandfather of mine by the name of Crow Ghost, and he was a ceremonial leader among our people, and his contemplations were not just with the people who are alive, but learning a lot from those who had gone into the spirit world, where he would communicate with them. And if people were having any kinds of difficulties or were searching for things, he was the conduit between that world and our living world. The world we have now is living as we are now, and he was this caretaker of this relationship. That kind of helped bring things back and forth. So for a lot of indigenous people, life does not end when one physically dies. One continues to be part of this greater cosmos in different kinds of ways. This is another great-grandfather called Bear's Teeth. He was a person who could call in the rains, but he was also sort of very in touch with the emotions of different kinds of animals and plants and people, and even what could be described as understanding the emotions of the weather, right? The emotions of the planet, and kind of putting that into that context. And of course, what these contemplatives were doing was spending a lot of time out in the world, where they would sit upon the earth and sort of focus their attention and awareness on all those things that were unfolding before them, with a very, very clear and purposeful way of trying to understand, as best they could, what was happening. And many of his words were prophetic, and his prophecies had to do with meditations on water, since water is all life. Some of the traditional contemplative and mindfulness practices in pain, I think, is really important, is to understand that part of decolonizing pain is really part of it is in the brain. And from what some of the research says, is that the brain center that turns off turns pain off is the amygdala, where it's the home of the negative emotions, responses, like the flight or fight response and general anxiety. And this is why Indigenous people always were involved in ceremony to kind of tamp down their sense of anxiety and to be brave and to be courageous, and also to be very contemplative. So that spiritual part of the brain would be more active, and the fearful part of the brain would be, tamped down and sort of go offline. There's some really interesting news too that I was reading that researchers have developed a treatment called pain reprocessing therapy, PRT, to help the brain unlearn the kind of pain that kind of pain that comes from back pain. So PRT teaches people to perceive pain perceive pain signals sent to the brain as less threatening, which makes perfect sense when I think about Indigenous people. Indigenous people, from the Great Plains area that I'm aware of, where I come from, pain was something to be actually invited into your life to know that you were alive. So, and there were a lot of ceremonies around that to bring it in. But when one was experiencing pain, then there were songs for that, there were ceremonies for that, and movement for that. And of course, there was collectivist culture where people would come together with other people to support them when they were having difficulties, whether it was the pain of the loss of the child, the pain of hunger, the pain of any kind of, as I said, loss or of unknowing and uncertainty, those kinds of things, right? So these are kinds of really interesting things that are coming out now in neuroscience. So if we're thinking about in my culture about how do we activate, and sort of develop a firewall. I'm not saying a complete firewall for pain, because pain is a really important part of our lives to help us know we're alive, right? But how do you block that in the sense of Indigenous people? And one of the things is that these practices they did had a lot to do with sacred object meditation. And this particular slide, you'll see here, this was one of my fellow tribesmen. Excuse me, I'm taking a drink of water. About 1903, Edward Curtis took this picture of this man gazing at these pipes. And something pretty miraculous happens in the brain. As he gazes on these pipes, and he senses the sacredness of the pipes and the meaning of these pipes and how they help the people. I've used this as a proxy, these brain scans that I got from a colleague. If you look at the baseline in the attention area, there's a non-connection on the left prefrontal cortex where it says attention area. As you move into deeper meditation, you'll see that it's connected. Once it's connected, there's something pretty miraculous happens. This has been shown over and over again in brain imaging studies. So for the average person who really is at this sacred, deep level of meditation, feelings of happiness, joy, optimism, and well-being begin to flood the body. The more this person pays attention to the sacredness before him or before her or before them, then they develop a stronger and stronger connection. And in fact, when you look at the back of the brain where it says baseline and meditation, the very back of the brain, you'll see that on the baseline, it's not quite as red as the meditation part is when a person is actually engaged in meditation. But this particular individual then, once they reach the level of meditation, that part of the brain is the seeing part of the brain, and they're seeing possibility. They're seeing beyond the pipes. They're seeing the connection. They're seeing the world. They're seeing the sacredness. Maybe they're seeing where the stone was taken from the earth, the pipe stone. They're seeing the pipe stems that were taken from certain trees that were watched over by the guardian spirits, and where they laid down their tobacco in respect for taking these. So this is the kind of thing that we know now, that as Indigenous people were engaged in these kinds of things, they began this decolonization of their brain and made it more focused and made it more open to these possibilities and these feelings and emotions. This is another slide now about how do we connect with all living things. So this Andrew Newberg is a neuroscientist that I've kind of had a little bit of collaboration with. I've talked with him before, and he's given me permission to use some of his slides. Well, this here is a picture of, again, ceremony of people in my community taken about 1903 or 1904 by this guy, Edward Curtis, who was writing this book called The Vanishing Indian, where the Indians were all going to, Indigenous people were all going to disappear. So what he did was he spent time scanning the brains of nuns and Buddhists who were undergoing these mystical experiences. And as they were going through these experiences, they began to have these feelings, of timelessness, like all time didn't matter anymore. There was no time, spacelessness, so that nothing was confining them, and self-transcendence. And of course, what we know, part of that is chemical, the other part is spiritual. So when he looked closer at their brain, he saw their parietal lobe, and I'll show you a slide of that in just a second. This part of the brain that, kind of is really responsible for perceiving three-dimensional objects in space and also visual spatial reasoning actually had sort of gone offline. As it had went offline, these monks and these nuns, or anyone who's done a lot of meditation, deep meditation, then began to experience this sense of oneness with all living things, or unity, because of the reduced activity in the parietal lobe, which kind of then sort of quieted down the idea that we were separate from these kinds of things, between the meditator and the object, that there was no longer separation. We see this then again in my tribe there, where these men, I have to apologize here. I've got a lot of pictures about Indigenous men here, and Indigenous women clearly involved in a lot of these ceremonies, some of the women's ceremonies, and doing the same thing. When Edward Curtis took a lot of these pictures, he didn't take pictures of women in our tribe. It was kind of more of this man kind of thing. But anyway, so here's the men again having this really deep experience, singing to this tree of life that they consider to be the mother, right? Who comes to help the people, the sentient being that's there, that gives life to the world, that's part of the life to the world. And as you see on the right side there, the parietal lobe on the right side of the brain then is not very activated. It's gone quiet. So as they are singing to the cedar tree during this deep meditation, this transformation takes place, and pretty soon that blurs, their reality, or it changes their reality. I shouldn't say blurs, it changes their reality. Pretty soon that there's no distance between them and the tree. They become connected to the tree. They become the branches. They become the fragrance. They become the leaves. They become the roots of the tree. If you can imagine that people at one time all around the world, before we got so industrialized, that we were involved in this religion or this spirituality that was so connected to the earth that it would change the structure and function of our brain in this, and what they call neuroplasticity. And that's exactly what was happening with these guys singing to the tree. As you'll notice, many of them don't have shoes on. Some of them have moccasins on, and they're feeling the earth beneath them too as well. So they're having this very vivid, deep, experience with the ceremony and the earth and the tree and all the creation around them. It's not that we're just here, but they could see in a much larger way. So there are some contemplative practices that can heal pain. And from this particular slide, you'll see that this guy, also a member of my tribe, singing and doing ceremony, changing his brain waves, and of course, it's changing other parts of the brain. On the lower left side there, we see what we call the insula in the brain. And the insula of the brain is part of the brain that helps us develop a sense of reducing conflict. If we have conflict around pain, conflict around life, whatever, when we activate this part of the brain through deep meditation and spiritual practices, that can actually help us to kind of tamp down that conflict we have with pain, or the conflict we have with people, or the conflict we have with other ideas, and so on. Something that I've really been interested in looking at more recently is aromatherapy, and this medicinal and therapeutic use of different kinds of smells that really, really began to affect our brain and our body, and especially our memory. There's this huge influence that fragrances have on our what they call psychophysiological activity. So researchers at UC Irvine found that older adults who were exposed to different scents every night for 6 months showed a 226% improvement in memory performance, right? That's incredible when you think about that. And the reason I believe that is because we are the product of hunter-gatherers from 100,000 years ago, and we've kept a lot of those kinds of ancient parts of our brain. The olfactory system is a very, very old part of our brain ancient part of our brain that perceives scent and smell. We can smell friendly things, hurtful things, exciting things, foods, sweet, sour, those kinds of things. We have this beautiful brain and olfactory system that does that. So people are tapping into it now. But when you see indigenous people lighting smudge and sage and cedar and tobacco, those kinds of things, they're very powerful in the brain for folks, right? This particular study used all these essential oils: rose, orange, eucalyptus, lemon, peppermint, rosemary, and lavender. And so the researchers, like I said, and I think like a lot of us probably kind of already, intuitively know, that the scents stimulate the memory centers of the participants' brains while they slept. So for us, when I've done ceremony, it's been very difficult, like Sundance ceremony, and I haven't eaten for many days, and I've been in hot sweat lodges, and I'm suffering. A smell of a cedar or smell of sage or sweetgrass gives me an uplift, and it sort of tamps down in my brain this feeling of nauseousness, this feeling of pain, this feeling of difficulty that I'm having, which makes perfect sense. So when you look at the literature, the conclusion is that these odors provoke this positive autobiographical memories. If you've had, positive memories in the past before you've had pain, and the smells of those things are probably going to have the potential to increase positive emotions, decrease negative mood states that we know already. This is one of the things the amygdala kind of hijacks and increases our pain. So we can bring that amygdala down, and disrupt, cravings, and reduce physiological indices of stress, including systemic markers of inflammation, which also cause pain. This is something that, we see now. And I've been reading a lot in the literature where again, people are buying these diffusers, and they're finding out that it does do a lot of sort of positive things for people. There's these practices. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'll just kind of move into them. The big one that I'm going to talk about, is meditation and the contemplation I was talking about. So most of this information comes from a book called Altered Traits by Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson. So if you're interested in that book, I'll leave it up just for a second. But Altered Traits has a lot of this information. How many hours of meditation does it take to begin to see change? This is my oldest daughter. She's now 17. She's a senior in high school. This is when she was 2.5, when we lived out in Northern California, in Arcata, California. So she started meditating very early, and she's still a very good meditator. So what does 100 hours of meditation get you? Mindfulness meditation get you? Neuronal hormonal indicators of lessened stress reactivity began to show up. Like your neuronal activity of the amygdala will start quieting down, and positive parts like your left prefrontal cortex, like the man who was looking at the pipes, begin to activate more. Hormonal indicators are the levels of stress, and also cortisol and other, norepinephrine and those kinds of things that are more adrenaline-like factors begin to reduce. We get stronger emotional regulation, so that, if we're feeling pain, if we're feeling this or that, we can regulate our emotions much better. Introception, the ability to sense the internal states of our body, like when pain is starting to come on, or when it's leaving the body, or when it's just there, we can, or a heartbeat or whatever it is, get stronger. This is a class I had when I was teaching at Cal Poly Humboldt, Northern California, at Humboldt State University. 1,000 hours, this is my MSW class. 1,000 hours of practice reduces brain aging by almost 8 years. There's increased connectivity between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, meaning that your prefrontal cortex, the rational conscious part of your brain, begins to, kind of tamp down and regulate your amygdala, the fight flight of your part of your brain, which then, of course, according to the research I've just showed you, would reduce the level and the amount of pain. The decreased size of the nucleus accumbens. This circuit is associated with feelings of attachment and wanting, attachment to our pain, or the wanting of, getting away from the pain. As our nucleus accumbens shrinks down, this feelings of attachment to it, or the wanting it for leaving our body, would naturally decrease. Slower baseline breathing, lower overall metabolic rate, meaning we're a greater sense of relaxation, of course, and then better at solving working memory problems. 5,000 hours of practice really, you see a very high decreased stress response. If you look at the particular picture here, you'll see that the blue here is the loss of gray matter in the brains of people who, when they get into their 70s and 80s, right? The controls you can see who don't meditate have a lot of loss there, and that's not good because you want more gray matter that's a important protein in your brain that helps protect and connect different parts of the brain, keep different parts of the brain regions very healthy. You see, the meditators haven't lost as much, about only as half as much, maybe less than half as much as the controls. Again, increased memory and attention gets much better. Then here's where we begin to see small improvements in reverse sort of aging, right? Molecular markers of cellular aging begin to improve. Things like your telomeres at the end of the chromosomes actually begin to increase in size. We know that telomeres at the end of the chromosomes are a marker for life expectancy, for a general sense of well-being and wellness and health and that sort of thing. The shorter they get, the more we are exposed to diseases of aging, like cancers and diabetes and heart disease and those kinds of things. So here we have 5,000 hours that begins to show we're having some kind of reverse aging happening. The last one is decreased activation of default mode network, which is kind of the monkey mind. Our brain is all over the place, right? This is 10,000 hours. These are three of my older daughters when we lived in Fargo, North Dakota, they're meditating. But 1,000 hours of meditation practice is like these guys that were around the tree, or like the monks and the nuns in Andrew Newberg's study. These high levels in hours that you get these really high levels of synchronized gamma oscillations in the brain waves, which are really connected to high levels of creativity, complex learning, complex understanding of the world, and problem solving. Baseline brain patterns are similar to novice because it's like everyone's all meditating at the same time. So you start to get similar brain patterns. But the shrunken nucleus accumbens is really important because when we begin to reduce the nucleus accumbens part of our brain, and it's actually a circuit, research shows that we reduce our ability to identify with self. I would guess that we would also reduce our ability to identify with our self's pain. And in fact, once the nucleus accumbens shrinks, we get less of a sense of identity with ourselves and a greater sense of connection to the world around us, which again brings me back to those pictures of those men in front of that tree singing those sacred songs, and the monks and the nuns in Andrew Newberg's studies, right? A shrunken nucleus accumbens. So it's no longer just about me, it's about all of us, right? And then this is the last one, which I've been kind of looking at too, is that 1,000 hours for some people, they can achieve this instant voluntary control over pain. They somehow are able to ratchet up higher levels of endocannabinoids in their brain and shut off some of these pain receptors. And we've seen that, with some people doing that. So last couple slides here, all of this helps us build cognitive resilience with the stress that we have. The training in the second part here is that we do for Indigenous people, they train as they trained years ago to do these ceremonies, to go, to expose themselves to difficulties that brought along stress and uncertainty. But we know now from the research in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, the VMPFCs, what that is in the front part of the brain, we know that there's a high payoff that with a lot of that kind of disciplinary sort of training. We know that where it's located in the prefrontal cortex, as you see where it's activated there, the right side shows risky coping and no activation. The VMPFC, located in the frontal lobes and bottom of the cerebral hemispheres, risk and fear, does a good job of healthy processing of risk and fear. And it also plays a big role in the inhibition of emotional responses and the process of healthy decision-making and self-control. And again, something really big is that it really is involved with the cognitive evaluation of morality. What's the right thing I should do for myself? What's the right thing I should do for the world? What's the right thing I should do, to be a better person? So I'm going to just go ahead and stop there and see if there are questions.
Hi, Michael. A few questions came up in the chat. One was from Brian. What is the name of the study for correlation between gray matter, age, and meditation?
I don't know. That's a good question. I just have it out of the it's in the studies that uh, um, Goldberg and Davidson did. It's
Okay,
in the
so in
it's in the
altered
book.
traits.
Yeah, in Altered Traits. It's in the
Okay.
book. I,
Okay, great.
yeah.
And then there was another question from Janet. Could you please share the link to the study link in blue from a previous slide where you were talking about the many thousands of hours of meditation had an impact?
Yeah, I don't have the study link now because it's a hot link. I didn't press on it. But if you if is it Jenny or Jennifer?
Yes. Yeah.
If you write me, I'll send you the link.
Okay, for sure.
Yeah, send it to my email. So
And then another question from Teresa. Teresa, in what context are the hours of meditation measured? How many hours per month or year? When we're talking about the thousands of hours, I mean, they seem quite daunting, right? And so, yeah, could you comment on that?
yeah, I mean, it's hours are, it's like anything else, more is better, especially in mindfulness. But then you're also going to reach a state where, you're going to get a flat effect and diminishing returns. It all depends upon the individual, really. For someone like myself, 2 hours a day is good for me. It works perfect for me. I don't always get 2 hours a day, but I do meditate almost every hour for at least 5 minutes. I get
Mm.
kind of these mindfulness bites. I've been doing it for
Mhm.
such a long time that it's like weightlifting with me. When I lift weights,
Right.
I started out real heavy for a few years, and now I just I don't lift as much, but I lift heavier, right? I lift heavier, so it's that kind of thing. So, but yeah, it should be again the accumulation of hours per year. An hour a day is going to give you 365 hours. If you double that, you're going to get 720 hours a year. It would take you about 10 years to get to, above 5,000 hours between that point. But people go on retreats, a lot of times they'll go on month-long retreats and they build up a lot of hours. But I tell people like, don't feel like, it's out of your reach because you can get a lot of benefit just by very short meditations several times a day.
Mm.
It's like running, right? If you run just like for an hour and say, "Oh, I did that," but then you sit in a chair all day, you're not going to get the benefit, from that. You're going to lose that at some point. It's like that with mindfulness and meditation. You meditate an hour in the morning, every hour, set your alarm, just deep breathe and focus your brain and your gratitude and your sense of well-being for 5 minutes. You're done, move on, do that next hour. It's like mindfulness bites, little snacks, mindfulness snacks, we'll call them.
Love that. Another question from Brian. Is there a type of meditation practice that helps more than another? Or does it all help? And I think you sort of answered that question.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends upon the individual, but I really like, I've done a lot of different styles over the years, but I think one that really seems to be really important is one is created by Herbert Benson.
Mm.
He wrote a book called uh, the Relaxation Response rather than the fight and flight response. So he wrote the book in 1969 or whatever it is. And I don't know if I have, yeah, I have it right here. So I don't know if people can see it, but so this book is really sort of it's a good book. I mean, I've got the original one, but this one, what he kind of says is twice a day, 20 minutes. And that kind of one is, he says, pick for 20 minutes, get into your position and just breathe and relax yourself and come up with a word, like gratitude or like completely healed, you know, I,
Mm.
I love and heal myself or whatever. And whatever your mantra is, do that for 20 minutes during the morning and then in the evening for another 20 minutes. He's done some good research on that. Benson was at Harvard University for a while. I'm not sure he's still there anymore. I think he's retired. But yeah, I think you'll really enjoy his book. He wrote another book in 2010 called The Relaxation Revolution. So that, is very easy to do. It's very non-secular. And it really puts not only breathing together, but visualization as well as affirmations, which he teaches and which, you can find him on the web. Look up Herbert Benson and the relaxation response. He's got some videos up there too. So
Mm, thank you. There's a really interesting question from somebody in the Q&A. sometimes when we talk about meditation and pain, people think we are telling them it's all in your head. How do we communicate about this without furthering the sense of blame and invalidation that many people feel living with pain?
Yeah, I think, it's, as you all know now, it is partly in your partly in your head. It has to do with your amygdala
Mm,
but that's not the full story, right? The full story is that, what I try to tell is that um, pain is a shared kind of experience, you know, with Indigenous people. It's like the pain of the earth, the pain of, the world, the pain of the stars, whatever it is. People try to understand that, right? All these different kinds of things that made sense to them, right? And I think that's really what it is. It's really, in an Indigenous community, and we were all hunter-gatherers at one time. Everything was a shared experience. A birth was a shared experience. A death was a shared experience.
right.
Laughter was a shared experience. Grieving and crying was a shared experience. Pain was a shared experience. We no longer live that way as
Mm,
industrialized, first world societies. We're very individualized in that sense,
yeah.
right? We have no one, to, like in the old days, people would sing away your pain, or they would use a certain kind of ceremony to kind of take the pain out of the body, right? And if you had the right comp genes, the COMT genes, with the right variants, and your placebo, you responded really well to the placebo, like some people do, that pain would actually leave the body. But sometimes most of us are in the center. We don't have placebo genes, the comp genes, that there's a small group that like, it's never going to work, and their genes could be a CC copy. The people in the middle, like most of us, are CT copies, so we could go either way in the belief about whether or not something happens. The
Right.
people that are on the other end of the spectrum that have this particular gene, the comp gene, they call the warrior gene or the worrier gene. We know that also codes for placebo effect. And that those people that have a TT copy, if you tell them, say, I'm going to heal you, I'm going to bring all the forces of the universe, and they sit back and they believe that and they feel that, something very important and psychological and physical happens in the body where they heal. That's, that we know that now from research around genetics. And that research still continues to kind of accumulate. But since we're in the middle, we can go either way, right? It's like with anger, right, and hate and rage, or peace and love. It's like that old Cherokee story that says, this young man comes to his grandfather, and his Cherokee grandfather says, grandfather, I got, I'm having these emotions and these feelings. Some of them are these. On one side, I feel all this hate and this anger and this rage, and I want to hurt, and this other, and there's a lot of pain there. And he said, on the other side, I feel love and acceptance and peace and calm and generosity. It's like two wolves fighting inside of me. And he asked his grandfather, which one is going to win, grandfather? And his grandfather says, the one you feed, right?
Yeah.
That now is that's kind of like cutting edge neuroscience and brain plasticity. It's an old indigenous story. Like all of our indigenous cultures had at one time. They knew that, the importance of positivity. So people should not feel blamed. They should understand that they need systems around that are positive, that support them, that bring positivity and laughter and teasing and happiness to them.
Mm.
Right? That's our responsibility as collectivist cultures around the world. And that's the part of us that's been colonized by living in these, Western industrialized societies. So,
Yeah, and you mentioned at the very beginning of your talk, how do we heal from the pain of colonization?
right.
And what you said about um, what you said about contemplation and sacredness and the oneness feeling, just it really it moved me very deeply. And so um, and I think there's a part of me that's yearning for that oneness again, or that, to be not an individual, but to be more of a collective. um Couple more questions. One from Shelley, very specific. Have you looked at fibromyalgia, pain, and meditation?
I have not personally. No, no.
Okay.
I know what it is and I know the pain of it, but I have not looked at the research in that area. So
Okay. And then another one from Janet. Have you come across any good results on meditation and energy conservation? Because pain often depletes our energy.
I haven't either. I haven't looked at that either as well. I'm going to assume without, just I would say that without looking at the literature that that meditation, and contemplative, it's not, now don't just think about meditation as sitting on a cushion, folks. It's not just about sitting on a cushion. Meditation can take a number of forms: walking meditation, eating meditation, listening meditation, showering meditation, washing your dishes meditation, but being in the moment, right? That's what's really important. Or meditation can take the place of saying positive affirmations or saying prayers.
Mm.
That's what meditation it really is. It's not just sitting on the cushion. All those things have a way of inspiring changes to happen in the body. So it's important, I think, for folks to remember that. But it does, I think, in a sense, help mediate. I'm not saying it's 100% solution. I'm saying that this is what Indigenous people did. I'm not just talking about the last part of it was meditation, but I talked about that, already. If you can think about it, folks, is that the first thing I began with was medicine wheels and the power that those have to help sort of lead us in a direction of healing, right? And how they teach us that we're connected to everything and everything is connected to us.
Right.
And they've been doing it for thousands of years over here in Turtle Island. And people have been connecting to those, through prayers, by leaving, tobacco ties, by visiting these places. And they get a healing from that. That's one level of healing. There's all kinds of levels of healing that exist. One is being at these sacred places. One is understanding, what these people were doing thousands of years ago and what kinds of messages they were trying to convey to us, successive generations, as the descendants of those folks. And that's really why I kind of wanted to point that out, is that the symbiology, the petroglyphs, kind of really kind of show us that these things are universal. And these are the universal kinds of things that they paid attention to and took steps in to kind of figure out how do I heal myself? How do I connect? What, and asking those questions. I'm a small part of this bigger sort of, system, this great circle of life, right? And so the meditation is just the part of it. I'm talking about seeing things like my fellow tribesmen did through ceremony, as they sing, as they dance, as they meditate on different kinds of sacredness. There are a lot of slides I didn't show just because of the time factor, and I show ones where they sing and they dance. What happens to the brain when you sing and dance, right? Or even when you imagine a song, just like when I said, when you imagine, like the olfactory system does, when you smell a scent from long ago when you were a child that was like a really pleasant, like, oh, it brings back such warm memories. The olfactory system, has this way of eliciting these autobiographical kind of memories of, triumph, of, the smell of victory, right? The scent of love, the scent of calm, the scent of, compassion, or whatever it is. I'm just trying to explain what people did, besides just the, mindfulness meditation part, but all of those are connected to meditation, all those things, so.
Because it's another way of transporting yourself, right? Like I think you mentioned how olfactory is such a primeval, the olfactory sense is such a primeval response that accesses memory, and that there are scents from your childhood or scents from that bring you to, that transport you places when you are in a state of pain. And I think there was a study, I can't remember that, and I wrote down the scents that were used in that study, like orange, eucalyptus, lavender, and to be fair, I think a lot of them are very those are not the scents that I grew up with, right? So for me, it's an interesting what's the word? It would be interesting for me as somebody who did not necessarily grow up with, rose, eucalyptus, lavender, to discover the scents for myself that would transport me to other places of healing, of peace, of calm. So Couple more questions or comments here. One is, thank you, Dr. Yellowbird. I found meditation to be a significant addition to my pain management toolkit. I was skeptical yet hopeful, and the commitment has definitely had benefits over time. Self-compassion and patience with myself has been helpful to remember when I want it fixed now. So it talks about that immediacy, right?
Mhm.
Another one from Desmond, the brain and the body are two parts of our entire being. And in order to work on healing our bodies, we must integrate the process of healing our brains alongside the physical practices so we can give ourselves the best fighting chance.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yep, I think folks are right on with seeing that sort of connection and that more holistic way of doing that kind of thing. You know, I've some things I haven't talked about now. I'll just mention just briefly. I've studied the brain for a while. I've studied, the brain's capacity, and it's pretty amazing what the brain can do. When we feed it the right messages. Um, there, I'm not saying it's the end all be all. It's gonna work miracles or whatever. But for some people, it does. It really does. There's one where a story that I tell where this one man, I'll call him John, who was a pretty healthy person, but he started not feeling well. He went to see his doctor, and his doctor diagnosed him and said, "You have fourth stage lung cancer. You've got to, you don't have much longer to live. You should go get your affairs in order." So, of course, John is upset. He went home, and he was really troubled by that. And he said, his doctor said, it has metastasized too, to your spine and other places. And so he thought, and John was a reader. So he calls his doctor up a few days later and said, can you get me into one of these, immunotherapy studies, right? And he said, I know, I've read a lot about them and I know they work. And so his doctor said, John, he said, that's very difficult. He said, those things are almost impossible to get into. He said, but he persisted. He kept on calling his doctor. Finally, his doctor said, okay, John, he said, I'm going to call, see if I can get you in. He said, but there's no guarantee. Lo and behold, he got into a study. So then John, he says, the doctor tells John, go to the people, get whatever they give you, the medication, do exactly as they tell you and nothing else, right? Okay. So he did. Start taking the medication, and about 3 months later, he started feeling better. So he goes and sees his doctor. His doctor says, "You've been taking the pills and whatever." He said, "Yeah." So he did some scans, and he said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Well, why don't you come back in another couple months?" He said, "We'll continue to follow this." So then he calls him 2 months later or whatever. He says, "John," he says, I called you." He said, "Coming before your appointment." He said, "I want to talk to you about something." So John says, "Oh boy, I guess he's going to tell me I'm going to die now." So he goes in and he sees the doctor, and the doctor says, "John, what have you been doing?" He says, "Taking my pills." He said, "Have you been following the protocol of the people, the researchers?" He said, "Yeah, everything." He said, "Would you change your diet? You start exercising? What have you been doing?" He said, "No, I walk every day, just the same diet, everything." He said, "Nothing different." He said, "Why do you ask?" He said, the doctor says, "Well, it's something going on." He says, "It looks like your cancer is going away, you know?" And John is happy about that. So then he says, "Well, come back and see me in a couple more months." And then he comes back and he says, "The cancer is almost completely gone." And John says, "Doc," he said, "I told you if you got me in that study, I told you," he said, "that would work." And so he says, there's nothing you did, anything different." He says, "Well, the only thing I did," he said, "is that every morning when I got up, I wouldn't hate to tell you this because I think I'm crazy. But before I took my pill, I talked to my pill. I told my pill, 'You're the most powerful pill in the universe. You're going to heal me. I believe in you.'" And he said, "I talked to that pill, and then I would take the pill." And the doctor said, "Oh, okay. All right." He said, "Well, John," he said, "your cancer's pretty well gone." He said, "I knew it would work. I knew the pills would work." And the doctor said, "There's only one problem, John." He said, "What's that?" He said, "You got the sugar pills. You didn't get the real pills." So, the story is like, how powerful the mind is, right? And I've read story after story. There's a lot of them, in the literature that you don't see published, in the mainstream literature, but all these findings that people talk about and say, wow, spontaneous healing or whatever it is. We know now that part of it is genetics, right? Part of it
Yeah.
is genetics. We also know that part of it is also the ability for one person to kind of begin to bend their selves in a willful, what they call willful, plasticity, brain plasticity, the willful changes in the brain, which is why that when you saw all those hours as they accumulate it, you begin to see different things happen in the brain, right? That's a long time, for those things to take place, but, the evidence is there. I just wanted to show that to folks to say, this is what people who live in a contemplative world in the past did, and probably why that when they had pain, they laughed at their pain. I know today people say, oh, that's so disrespectful to say me because I'm in so much pain, right? My mother was in pain. I've been in pain. And I know that from years ago that this is what people did. Now, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. I'm not judging it. I'm saying this is a cultural thing that people did. They counted coup on death. They counted coup on their pain. They touched it. They laughed at it, right? It made perfect sense to me because these people who are collectivist cultural people have a particular gene called the serotonin transporter gene, STG. So if you're interested in that, read some stuff by Joan Chiao, who is a cultural neuroscientist who writes about this, the cultural neuroscience and the serotonin transporter gene, that when people laugh a lot in these cultures, it raises their levels of endocannabinoids. These are they block pain. And these cultures laughed a lot. This is a really kind of one of the hallmark, traits of indigenous people is laughter and humor, even over hard times, even over death, even over the loss, right? And so this was pretty clear that that's what people were doing in the past. And I've looked at, documents from back in 1636 where different groups of people who are with missionaries are writing with these people are starving and they're still laughing and they're still doing their work and they haven't had anything to eat. Well, they were laughing not because it was funny, but they made humor out of it. But as they laughed,
Yeah.
the brain-derived neurotrophic factor rose in their brains, protecting their brain cells, and so did their endocannabinoids to protect their brains and to kind of reduce their pain. That's what cultural neuroscience is that we adapt to our environment, cell our genes and our culture evolve together, right?
Yeah. So is that what you mean when you said earlier that there are instances when you have invited pain with
Right.
respect to like having it be seen and validated and exposed and eventually perhaps maybe hopefully dissipated?
Yeah, yeah, yep, exactly. Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Thank you so much for this fantastic talk. There's a lot of accolades and gratitude and love in the chat and floating out in the Zoom ether, and um my deepest appreciation to you, Michael, for being with us today.